The cemetery was silent, save for the muffled sobs of the small group gathered around the tiny coffin. Olivia's parents stood closest, their faces pale and hollow, as if the life had been drained from them too. The priest's voice trembled as he recited the final prayers, his words barely audible over the rustling of the trees. And then, a crow landed on the Olivia. Its black feathers gleamed under the faint sunlight, and its sharp, beady eyes seemed to scan the crowd. The bird tilted its head as if listening to the priest's words, and then it let out a single, piercing caw. The sound echoed through the cemetery, freezing everyone in place. Olivia's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The crow hopped closer to the edge of the coffin, its talons scraping against the polished wood. It cawed again, louder this time, and then it did something no one expected. It began to peck at the coffin lid. At first the sound was soft, almost hesitant, but then the pecking grew louder, more insistent. The crow's beak struck the wood with a rhythmic urgency, as if it were trying to break through. "What is it doing?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. No one answered. The crow continued its relentless pecking, its movements frantic now. Olivia's father stepped forward, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "Shoo, get away from her!" he shouted, waving his arms. But the crow didn't budge. Instead, it stopped pecking and looked directly at him. Its eyes seemed to hold a strange intelligence, a knowingness that sent a chill down his spine. And then, from inside the coffin, there was a sound, a faint, muffled thud. The crowd froze. Olivia's mother let out a strangled cry, her hands clutching her chest. The priest dropped his Bible, the pages fluttering to the ground. The crow cawed one last time, its voice sharp and commanding, before it took off into the sky, disappearing into the trees. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. And then the thud came again. The sound was unmistakable now, a dull, rhythmic thudding from inside the coffin. It was faint, but it was there, echoing through the silence of the cemetery like a heartbeat. Olivia's mother staggered forward, her hands trembling as she reached for the coffin lid. "No, wait!" her husband shouted, grabbing her arm. This can't be real. It's impossible." But the thudding continued, growing louder, more urgent. The crowd began to murmur, their voices a mix of fear and disbelief. Some backed away, their faces pale, while others leaned in, their eyes wide with shock. The priest, visibly shaken, stepped forward. "We need to open it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Olivia's father hesitated, his hands clenched into fists. He looked at his wife, her tear-streaked face filled with a desperate hope he couldn't bear to crush. With a deep breath, he nodded. Together they pried open the coffin lid. The hinges creaked as the lid lifted, revealing the small, still figure inside. Olivia lay there, her face pale and peaceful, her hands folded over her chest. She looked as though she were sleeping, her dark lashes resting against her cheeks. For a moment, everyone held their breath, their eyes fixed on the little girl. And then, just as the silence became unbearable, Olivia's chest rose. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. "She's breathing!" Olivia's mother screamed, collapsing to her knees beside the coffin. "She's alive!" The crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted, cried, and prayed, their voices blending into a cacophony of disbelief and relief. Olivia's father reached into the coffin, his hands shaking as he lifted his daughter into his arms. Her skin was cold, but her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, they opened. Olivia's eyes were glassy, unfocused, but they were open. "Olivia," her mother whispered, her voice breaking. "Can you hear me?" The little girl didn't respond. Her gaze drifted past her parents, past the crowd, and settled on the trees where the crow had disappeared. Her lips parted as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came out. The priest stepped forward, his face pale. This is a miracle," he said, his voice trembling. "But we need to get her to a hospital now." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Olivia's parents sat in the back seat of the car, their daughter cradled between them. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her eyes half open but unseeing. She didn't speak, didn't move, but the faint rise and fall of her chest was enough to keep hope alive. The hospital staff was waiting when they arrived. Nurses rushed forward with a stretcher, their faces a mix of confusion and urgency, as they took Olivia from her parents' arms. The doctor, a tall man with a stern expression, listened as Olivia's father stammered out the story. The funeral, the crow, the thudding, the impossible moment when they realized she was alive. The doctor's expression didn't change. "We'll run tests," he said curtly before disappearing behind the swinging doors of the emergency room. Hours passed. Olivia's parents sat in the waiting room, their hands clasped tightly together. They didn't speak. There were no words for what they were feeling. Relief, fear, disbelief, all tangled together in a knot too tight to unravel. Finally, the doctor returned. His expression was unreadable as he approached them. "Your daughter is stable," he said, his voice calm but cautious. "But there's something unusual about her condition." "What do you mean?" Olivia's mother asked, her voice trembling. The doctor hesitated. "Her vital signs are weak, but they're there. Her brain activity, however, is inconsistent. It's as if she's in a state between consciousness and unconsciousness. We've never seen anything like it." Olivia's father frowned. "What does that mean? Is she going to be okay?" "We don't know," the doctor admitted. "We'll need to keep her under observation. But there's something else." He paused as if unsure how to continue. "When we examined her, we found marks on her chest. Small, precise marks, like puncture wounds. They're faint, but they're there." Olivia's mother gasped. "What kind of marks? What caused them?" The doctor shook his head. "We don't know. They don't match any medical procedure or injury we're familiar with, but they're recent." The room fell silent. Olivia's parents exchanged a glance, their minds racing. The crow, the pecking, the thudding. Could it be connected? "Can we see her?" Olivia's father asked finally. The doctor nodded. "She's resting now, but you can sit with her. Just be prepared. She may not respond to you." The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Olivia lay in the bed, her small frame dwarfed by the white sheets and tubes snaking around her. Her parents sat on either side of her, their eyes never leaving her face. The marks the doctor had mentioned were faint but visible, tiny circular punctures on her chest, just above her heart. They formed a strange pattern, almost like a constellation, and seemed to shimmer faintly under the fluorescent lights. Olivia's mother reached out, her fingers hovering over the marks. "What could have done this?" she whispered. Her husband shook his head. "I don't know. But that crow, it was pecking at the coffin. Do you think—" He didn't finish the sentence. The idea was too absurd, too impossible. And yet the memory of the crow's piercing eyes and its frantic pecking lingered in his mind. Olivia stirred suddenly, her head turning slightly on the pillow. Her parents leaned in, their hearts pounding. "Olivia," her mother said softly, "can you hear me?" For a moment, there was no response. Then slowly, Olivia's lips parted. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words were clear. "The raven, it spoke to me." Her parents froze. "What did you say?" her father asked, his voice trembling. Olivia's eyes remained closed, but her lips moved again. "It told me. I wasn't ready. It said, it had to bring me back." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "What does that mean, Olivia? What are you saying?" But Olivia didn't answer. Her breathing slowed, and she drifted back into unconsciousness, leaving her parents staring at her in stunned silence. The next few days were a blur of tests and consultations. Doctors came and went, their faces growing increasingly puzzled. Olivia's condition remained unchanged, her vital signs stable but weak, her consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. Her parents rarely left her side. They talked to her, held her hand, and prayed for a miracle. But the mystery of the marks in Olivia's cryptic words haunted them. One night, as they sat in the dimly lit room, Olivia's father noticed something strange. The marks on her chest seemed to glow faintly, a soft, silvery light that pulsed in time with the heart monitor. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing to the marks. His wife nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it? What's happening to her?" Before they could say more, Olivia's eyes snapped open. This time they were clear and focused, filled with a strange, otherworldly light. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice stronger now. "I need to tell you something." Her parents leaned in, their hearts pounding. "I wasn't supposed to die," Olivia said. "It was a mistake. The raven, it's not just a bird. It's a guardian. It watches over people like me, people who aren't ready to go. It brought me back." Her mother's tears spilled over. "But why? Why you?" Olivia's gaze softened. "Because I still have things to do, and because you need me." Her father reached out, his hand trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We do need you, sweetheart. More than anything." Olivia smiled faintly. "I know, but the raven said I can't stay forever. Just a little longer." The room fell into a heavy silence after Olivia's words. Her parents sat frozen, their minds struggling to process what she had just said. The idea of a guardian raven, a supernatural force intervening to bring their daughter back, was beyond anything they could comprehend. Yet the evidence was right in front of them. The marks on her chest, the crow at the cemetery, and now Olivia's calm, knowing expression. "Olivia," her mother began, her voice trembling, "what do you mean you can't stay forever? What does that mean?" Olivia's gaze shifted to the window, where the moonlight streamed in, casting a silvery glow over the room. "The raven told me that life and death are like a balance," she said softly. "Sometimes mistakes happen. People are taken too soon, or they're not ready to go. The raven fixes those mistakes, but it's only temporary. It's not its place to change the natural order forever." Her father's jaw tightened. "So what are you saying? That you're going to leave us again?" Olivia turned to him, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed far too deep for a child. "Not yet," she said. "I have a little more time. But when it's my time to go, I'll have to. The raven said it's important to accept that." Her mother let out a choked sob, clutching Olivia's hand tighter. No. We can't lose you again. We won't let you go." Olivia's expression softened. "I don't want to leave you either," she whispered. "But the raven said it's not about what we want. It's about what's meant to be." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. Olivia's parents exchanged a glance, their hearts breaking at the thought of losing her again. But there was something else in Olivia's eyes, something calm and accepting, as if she had already made peace with what was to come. "What happens now?" her father asked finally, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia smiled faintly. "Now we make the most of the time we have," she said. "The raven said that's the most important thing, to cherish every moment, to love each other, and to let go when it's time." Her mother wiped her tears, forcing a smile. "Then that's what we'll do," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "We'll make every second count." Olivia nodded, her smile widening. "Good," she said, "because I have so much I want to do." The days that followed were filled with a bittersweet joy. Olivia's strength slowly returned, and though the doctors couldn't explain her recovery, her parents didn't care. They spent every moment with her, taking her to the park, reading her favorite books, and holding her close as if they could keep her safe through sheer willpower. But the marks on Olivia's chest never faded. They remained faint but visible, a constant reminder of the raven's presence and the temporary nature of her return. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Olivia asked to go to the cemetery. Her parents hesitated, but Olivia insisted. "I need to say thank you," she said simply. They agreed, and the three of them stood at the edge of the cemetery, the air cool and still. Olivia stepped forward, her eyes scanning the trees. And then it appeared. The crow landed on a low branch, its black feathers gleaming in the fading light. It tilted its head, its sharp eyes fixed on Olivia. "Thank you," Olivia said softly, her voice carrying through the quiet cemetery. "For giving me more time." The crow cawed once, a sound that seemed to echo with a strange ancient wisdom. Then it spread its wings and took flight, soaring into the sky until it disappeared into the horizon. Olivia watched it go, a small smile on her lips. Her parents stood behind her, their hearts heavy but full. They didn't know how much time they had left with her, but they knew one thing for certain. They would cherish every moment. And when the time came to let her go, they would do so with love, knowing that the raven had given them a gift far greater than they could have ever imagined.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.